Hi guys, in today's video we can discuss about lipids. When we talk about lipids, first thing you should know what are the elements it is made of. So they are made up of carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. So when I say these three elements, you should remember another molecule which contain the same components. So that is carbohydrates. So the difference between the carbohydrates and the lipids in the components of elements, the lipids have very less oxygen compared to carbohydrate. Okay, yeah, and then if we think about the common characteristics of lipids, they are insoluble in water and they are soluble in organic compounds like ethanol and some other organic compounds. Okay, and the lipids are macromolecules. So what are macromolecules? Or what is the meaning of macromolecule? They have a very large amount of mass in one molecule, but they are not polymers. All the polymers are macromolecules, but not all the macromolecules are polymers. Did I confuse you? Okay, let's see examples. If we talk about polymers, or the example for one polymer is a polysaccharide, like for example cellulose. They are polymers because they have repeating units, but they aren't macromolecules as well because they have a large amount of mass in one molecule. But in lipids, they don't have repeating unit, but their molecular mass is very high, so they are macromolecules but not polymers. Okay, now let's talk about triglycerides. So they are made up of glycerol molecule and fatty acid molecules. Okay, now let's see how a glycerol molecule look like. So it is a 3-carbon compound and each carbon is attached to an alcohol group, which is an OH group, and always carbon in an organic compound they have 4 bonds. So already this carbon is bonded to an OH group and a carbon, so 2 bonds are left. So I can fill it with hydrogen. Okay, so now let's see how a fatty acid molecule look like. Okay, so fatty acid. So when I say acid in an organic molecule, it refers to carboxylic acid. So this is the chemical structure of carboxylic acid, and they are attached to a hydrocarbon chain. So usually we write the hydrocarbon chain as R group, so it will contain many carbon-hydrogen bonds. Yeah. So sometimes we can also, or in some books they write this structure like R group in this format. Okay, so you don't want to panic if you see this. This is just same as the R group. So this structure tells you like these corners, in every corner there is a carbon atom. Okay, so this is a bond, this black one, the line is the bond. Okay, so this is the structure. Okay, anyway, so I don't want to go into detail because it's not a chemistry lesson. Okay, so remember, if the fatty acid is given in any of these ways, you should be able to recognize it. Okay, now let's see how these two components, that is fatty acid and glycerol, they make up the triglyceride. Okay, so glycerol, and here I have to add another fact here. One glycerol binds with 3 fatty acids. Okay, so how do I draw the glycerol structure? You know, it is a 3-carbon compound, and each carbon has an OH group, and the rest of them are hydrogens. Okay. Yeah. Now, for the fatty acids, there should be 3 fatty acid molecules. So the R group may vary in each fatty acid. So just to differentiate, I'm gonna label this as R1. And this one has R2. And this one has R3. So depending on the triglyceride it forms, the R group which is attached to the fatty acid will vary. Okay, now let's see how they form the bond. So here they will undergo a condensation reaction. So what is a condensation reaction? It should release a water molecule. Okay, so from the glycerol molecule, from this OH group, the H will bind with the OH group of this fatty acid, so it will release water molecule. And again, same story here, same story here. Okay, now what I can do is I can erase this. Okay, good. Bear with me until finish. Okay, so now they will form a new bond. Okay, yeah, so these bonds are called ester bond. Remember, this is one product, and which is called the triglyceride molecule. And remember, they also release 3 water molecules from 3 fatty acids and the glycerol. Okay. So triglycerides are commonly known as fats and oils. So fats and oils, they are chemically similar as they are triglycerides, but the difference is in their physical state. Fat is we can find fat as solids in room temperature. Okay, and oils, they can be found as liquids in room temperature. Okay, so now let's see a bit detail about fatty acids. Okay, so fatty acids, there are 2 types. One is called the saturated, and the other one is the unsaturated. So saturated means they are saturated with hydrogen. Okay, for example, fatty acid, you know, they have a carboxylic acid and they have the hydrocarbon chain. So this is the carboxylic group and this is the hydrocarbon chain. So in the hydrocarbon chain, they only have single bonds between carbons. Okay, and they are filled, or they are saturated with hydrogen. That's why we call them as saturated. That means filled with hydrogen. But if you think about unsaturated, they also have carboxylic acid. Their hydrocarbon chain will contain at least one CC double bond. So depending on how many C double bond C are there, we can categorize them into two groups. The first one is the mono unsaturated and the poly. So mono unsaturated means they only have one C double bond C, and in poly there are more than one C double bond C. Okay, so now let's see what are the examples. So for saturated fatty acids, the examples are butter and lard. So as I said earlier, they are solids, so they have a very high melting point compared to the unsaturated ones. Okay, and for unsaturated, the examples are fish oil and olive oil. If you want, you can add sunflower oil, whatever. Okay, and as they are liquids, they have a low melting point. So remember in here, I say lower and higher. This is just comparison between the saturated and unsaturated. Okay, now let's see what are the functions of triglycerides and what are their properties related to their functions. They are used as energy store, in both plants and animals. Okay, if you can remember the compound or the carbohydrate which is used as storage compound in plants, think a second. Okay, think you got it right. So it is starch in plants, and in animals it is glycogen. Yeah. Okay, so what are the properties which relate or which leads to this storage function? So if you can remember in the previous case, in the starch and glycogen, they were insoluble. Yeah, here the same property applies for the lipids as well. They are insoluble so that they won't affect the water potential or osmotic potential. Okay, water potential or osmotic potential. That is one property which leads to the storage function, and the other property is they have a higher ratio of carbon-hydrogen bonds, so that they have a higher amount of energy packed in these carbon-hydrogen bonds. Okay, they have a low mass to energy ratio. That means they release more than twice the value of carbohydrates, right? Okay, and the next function, they provide source of metabolic water. So what is metabolic water? You know water, right? So metabolic water is the water which is released by the chemical reactions inside the body. Okay, so they have, or these lipids have, the triglycerides have high ratio of hydrogen to oxygen atoms, so that they can release metabolic water. So this property is helpful, or this function is helpful for the animals which live in dry deserts, so they can use the metabolic water when there is no water in their environment. Okay, and the third function is the thermal insulation. They provide insulation for living organisms. For example, they are stored under the skin. Okay, the next function is they act as a protective coat. They provide protection for the internal organs. Okay, so these are the functions of triglycerides. Well, let's move on to a new compound, which is the phospholipids. So phospholipids, as the name suggests, they contain a phosphorus in their structure. So in addition to the carbon, hydrogen and oxygen, which are the common component of all the lipids, they have phosphorus. Okay, we'll see the chemical structure. So triglyceride, they are made up of glycerol, and fatty acids, free fatty acids. So in here what happens, the difference between the triglyceride and the phospholipid is, instead of 3 fatty acids, there is only 2 fatty acids. Okay, to replace the third fatty acid, the phosphate group will be attached. Okay, so when they undergo chemical reaction, they undergo condensation reaction, and then they form phospholipid. Okay, I'll draw a detailed diagram of phospholipid in a minute. This is the glycerol molecule, which I've written in red, and the yellow bit shows you the part of fatty acid molecules. There are 2 fatty acid molecules, and then instead of the third fatty acid molecule, this molecule has a phosphate group. Okay, so that's why we call it has phospholipid molecule. So you can see here, I've drawn the phospholipid molecule in a very simple diagram. You can see here, in the right hand corner, you can see the purple color is the head, and these two are the tails. So the polar group of the phospholipid molecule forms the polar head, like I have indicated here, and this is the non-polar part, or non-polar tail. So now let's see how these polar and non-polar characteristic changes the feature of the phospholipid molecule. Okay, so the polar head is called it has the hydrophilic character, and non-polar tail has the hydrophobic character. So what does this mean? Hydrophilic and hydrophobic. Hydro means water. Philic means this is water. Philic means they love water. That means they attract water. They attract towards water. Okay. And hydrophobic means, so hydro, which is water, and phobic means they hate. So phobia means fear. So you can remember this. Hydrophobic, they are fear, or they are afraid of water. But remember, in exams you can't say, if they ask you to explain the term, you can't say they are afraid of. You can use the term afraid. I'm just saying, just to remember. So you can say it repels water. Hydrophobic means it repels water. Okay, and hydrophilic means they attract water. Okay, right. So now let's see what are the functions of phospholipids. Okay, so they are the major component of the cell membrane. Function, major component of cell membrane or cell surface membrane. I'll write cell membrane because it's in all the membranes. Okay, so what characteristics of this phospholipid molecule is these functions? So you have a polar head and a non-polar tail. So the polar head allows the water-soluble molecules to... Okay, now let's see the functions of phospholipid molecule. So the first function is they are the major component of cell membranes. So they have a polar head which is hydrophilic and non-polar tail which is hydrophobic. So as they have hydrophobic tails, that means those tails allow to enter the lipid soluble molecules. So they allow lipid soluble substances to enter and leave the cell. And the hydrophobic tail, they also act as a barrier to the entry of water soluble substances. So if I draw a very quick diagram of the cell surface membrane, this is a phospholipid molecule, the head and the tail. These are arranged in two layers, which is called the phospholipid bilayer. So we'll learn about this when we talk about the cell membrane structure in detail. Okay, so these hydrophobic tails, they do not, when a water-soluble component try to pass through the membrane, they won't allow them to pass through because these tail act as a barrier. Okay, and the second function is they act as an electrical insulator in myelin sheath. So in the nerve cell, there is a sheath around the nerve cells which is called the myelin sheath, which act as an electrical insulator that is made up of phospholipid molecule. Okay, you will learn about this in detail in your A2. And the third function is they allows to form glycolipid. So some of the lipids can form in the surface of the phospholipid molecule. So they will form the chains like this. Again, you will learn this in detail when you learn about the cell membranes. Okay. Wax is another type of lipid. It can be found in the exoskeleton of insects. It helps for the insects in reducing water loss. As wax is a lipid molecule, they have hydrophobic parts. So these hydrophobic parts help in this function. Also find wax in the cuticle of leaves, so they act as a waterproofing agent in the leaves. Thank you for watching, guys. Please share and subscribe.